Good afternoon, everyone. I'm so happy that you're able to be with us during these obviously very, very crazy times that we are living in. So as we've got sort of a mix of clients and colleagues on the call today. So it's obviously extraordinary times that we live in. I think it was 2 weeks ago, although it's hard to believe, and we held a webinar for our clients about the coronavirus. And today's session is about action learning coaching. And I learned about action learning coaching, I think it's now 3 years ago. I knew action learning, I didn't know about action learning coaching when one of our clients was interested. And we are lucky to have one of the real gurus in the business today with us, B. Carson. So next slide, please. So B is one of, as I said, one of the real gurus of action learning coaching. B, how many years have you been an action learning coach?
Nearly 20.
20 years. So I have to believe, other than Mike Marquardt, you're probably one of the, they say, I know at Apple Computer, they say, I was employee number 72 or 57. I imagine you were one of the first people trained in this methodology. Is that true?
Mike had done classes for GW before I had met him, but I am one of the 6 that formed the World Institute for Action Learning and defined the standards for coaching.
Gotcha. That's what I thought. So again, we are lucky to have B. I think you'll find that she has forgotten more about action learning coaching that most people know. And I think she's designed, an informative session for us to get a little bit smarter about this really powerful tool that is available to us that, as I say, and B will, if I don't quite get it correct, she can correct me, but I always think of action learning coaching like it's a triple dip of ice cream. So the first scoop is you get a team together and they're able to make some process improvements. The second scoop is they get to improve their team skills by working together. And the third scoop is they get to improve a job specific skill. B, is that a fair representation or not so much?
That'll do.
Okay. So
I think of the triple more as getting the problem solved, developing as an individual leader, and developing as a team. And then there's the fourth one that comes out on top of it, where you see the organizational culture shift.
Yep. Of course. So be like, who doesn't like ice cream? So have 4 scoops of an ice cream, nothing better than that. So next slide, please. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk a little bit about us. And then what I'll do is I'll cover some ground rules for today's session. So one thing, I believe in the chat bar, Kamori Francis has put her email. If anyone is having any challenges hearing me or seeing the slides, email Kamori and she'll get you situated. So a little bit about us. So the mission of Boxer Advisors, and this is the 25th year that I've run my own consulting firm. I ran another business for 17 years. So the mission of Boxer Advisors is to deliver high impact coaching, consulting, and training solutions to meet our clients' needs. And we believe that the secret sauce to doing what we do is integrating our solutions into what our clients are doing. And we find that when we do that, our clients are able to have some sort of tangible return on investment. Next slide. So there are three things that we do with clients. We help them to develop partnerships with internal, external clients. We help them to identify best-in-class solutions, and we help them translate insights into action. Next slide, please. So what I want to do is talk a little bit about the learning outcomes for the session. Before I do that, let me cover a couple of ground rules. So everyone is muted, but that doesn't mean you can't participate. So B, we do have a number of polling questions to ask clients. Is that right?
Yes.
That's right. And for me, it's at the bottom of my computer. There's a scroll bar, and you should see on yours, it should say either chat or it might say a Q&A. And if you have questions, B has said that she's more than willing to answer questions as we go. And if you're in the same situation that I am sometime, so sometimes I'm on a webinar, and obviously these days I'm on a lot of Zoom meetings, but if you're on one and we end the session, which we will, promptly at 2 o'clock, and there's a question that B didn't have time to answer, we're going to give you my email at the end of the session. You can send me an email. If I can answer it, I'll answer it. And if it's a question for B, she'll answer it. So before I talk learning outcomes, B, again, we're so grateful that you were willing to spend an hour with us today. Is there anything else about your background that you'd like people to know before we dive into the content?
Mentioned that was one of the co-founders of the World Institute for Action Learning. Up until last year, I was the president of WOW USA. And at this stage, I'm starting to back off and slow down with my life, but I still love doing these conversations.
Yeah. Well, again, there's, from my perspective, there's not too many people in the world who know as much as you know about action learning coaching. So I know I'm looking forward to hearing the session. So let me talk a little about the learning outcomes. So what we're going to do is understand, the possibilities. What is action learning coaching? B, we'll talk a little bit about the benefits of action learning, understand how it might be different from traditional team coaching. And then as a added benefit for all of us, there'll be an opportunity, I believe, this is right, B, that everyone's got an opportunity to practice doing.
We've got a bunch of practice scenarios at the end, and we'll get through as much as we can. There's an awful lot of content and not a lot of time, so we'll see how far we can get.
That's great. Next slide, please. So what we want to do is launch our first poll, trying to get a sense from you is what are you hoping to learn from today's session. So Kamori, if you can launch the first poll, that would be great. And we'll give everyone another about 25 seconds to answer it. So if you can give us your perspective on what are you hoping to learn from today's session, that would be great. Okay, we'll end the poll in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, let's go ahead and close the poll, Kamori. And so I think, Kamori, can everyone see the results? Yes?
Yep.
Okay, so B, what do you make that it sounds as though 80% want to understand how to ask positive questions, which is, I think, a great thing. 40% how to facilitate a team problem-solving meeting and how to be an active learning coach. So those are great things. I think, and how to be an effective action learning coach. I'm assuming those are things that you can talk about.
Most definitely.
Excellent. All right. Next slide. So I'll let you take it from here, B, unless you want me to talk about the agenda or do you want to do it?
You can.
Yeah. So the way B has structured the meeting is she's going to, talk a little bit about, what does it mean to facilitate an action learning meeting? What are some group norms and maintenance skills? So once you set one of these teams up, how do you sort of keep them going? Obviously, for those people who are familiar with action learning coaching, one of I think the most important things is for the action learning coach to ask high impact questions. So debriefing skills are going to be critical, obviously important to follow up, and then talk about how can you do, action planning and wrap up. So that's what we've got planned. And so B, I'll let you take it from here.
Okie dokie.
Excellent.
We have another polling question. What is your understanding of action learning?
Yeah, that's an important one. So we'll keep
Time
this.
should we give for the poll?
Yep. So we'll keep this poll open. For another 10 seconds. So, Kamori, we'll go ahead and close the poll in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. We'll go ahead and close the poll. So, 50% B said a process for uncovering solutions. That was the biggest one. And then the next one was it looks as though, if I'm tracking this, a problem-solving process where teams and leaders develop while getting work done. What's your reaction to the answers, B?
That this is a common misunderstanding. The one that most people picked is actually action research.
I see.
And this is where some of the confusion with action learning comes in. Is
I see.
like the first one is actually experiential learning, but
Yes.
many people confuse it with action learning.
Gotcha. I would say for those people who answered other, if there's a way for you to type in the chat bar what you meant from other, that would be great. And so B, I'll let you take it from here and I'll monitor the chat bar. And if there's something helpful, we'll let you know.
Okay, so the WILE definition of action learning is the problem-solving process where teams and leaders develop while they are getting real work done.
Gotcha.
All right, another polling question. What is future positive team coaching?
So again, we'll keep this poll open for about another 25 seconds. So B, we had our first question. You can either answer now or it's probably something better. The question was, when you're facilitating an action learning team, knowing that many of these now are virtual, if you have any suggestions for time management in conducting these sessions on a webinar, you probably want to wait till later, but.
Yeah, it's actually the same time management as if you're doing it face-to-face.
Yep, that's right.
One of the key responsibilities of the action learning coach is to ensure that we maintain the time that we've allotted so that we finish on time.
Yep, that's right. So Kamori, if you can go ahead and close the poll, that would be great. So B, 83%. This is a pretty sophisticated audience. Say,
yeah, I'm gonna say. I was gonna say most of them must have been in a class with me at one point.
Yeah. So I would ask people, just in a chat bar, how many people have been through one of B's classes. If you can just, if you've been through it, just say, yes, I've been through it. So B, I'll let you continue from here.
Okay. So yeah, future positive coaching is about planting seeds in a positive, non-judgmental way.
You probably want to advance your slide.
Yep.
Yep.
So I'm going to just do a very, very quick summary of what action learning is for those that are not familiar with it. It's a process where a small team works on a real problem, committed to taking action and learning while they're doing so. There are other ways that we use it that when we've got more time, we can go into those. But for today's purposes, we'll go with the first definition.
That's great.
There are only two ground rules in action learning. The first one being statements can only be made in response to a question. There are no rules around questions, but in order to make a statement, you have to be answering a question you were asked. And the second ground rule is that the learning coach has the authority to intervene whenever there's the opportunity for learning. And learning comes in multiple flavors. The two most common ones are something really, really good happens that we want to reinforce, or something not so good happens that we want to shift behavior. Either way, our questions tend to be of the same design in that they are going to plant the seeds for future positive behavior. Whether that's reinforcing doing good or shifting from not so good to better. Typical problem solving, a meeting announcement goes out and someplace between 5,000 and 5,000 people are invited so we can come to consensus. 2 or 3 very dominant people talk past each other the whole time. Most influential person wins. With action learning, we flip-flop the process around a bit. And the problem presenter only gets about 2 minutes to present their take on the problem. The problem presenter tends to talk too much if you don't hold them to the 2 minutes. They either start talking solution or talking context that really isn't relevant. So by keeping them to 2 minutes, they have to be very focused in what they think their challenge is. And then it opens up the team to be able to ask questions around it. And the team is able to dig out and get the information they need. In this first phase of action learning, we have to come to consensus on what the real problem we're trying to solve is. Too often we throw a solution at a symptom instead of addressing the problem. Great example of that is a number of years back, I started losing the hearing in my left ear. I went to an ENT. After many, many visits, he finally said, you must have had a virus. You're losing the hearing in your left ear, get used to it. A couple of years down the road, it was getting worse, getting worse, getting worse. I went to a different ENT. He said, maybe the hearing loss is the symptom of a deeper problem. Let's do an MRI. 3 years down the road, I'm still recovering from the brain surgery that I had to have as a result of the tumor that he found. Had the first doctor done the MRI, it would have been outpatient surgery. So very, very important to get to the real problem and fix that before moving to solution. One of the key elements of action learning is that every session must finish with action. These might be actions for taking next steps. They might be actions for helping us figure out what our next goal is. They may be the solution, but every single action learning session must finish with action. And like Ken said, if you've got questions along the way, put them in the chat box and he'll throw them out at me as we can.
Gotcha. So we do have our first question, and I'm assuming, B, that the answer is yes, but you know what they say about assuming. B, I'm assuming you're comfortable if we send out a copy of the slides in a PDF afterwards, yes?
Most definitely.
Okay, so if everyone who's registered, if you send me an email, we'll give you my email at the end of the session. If you want to get a copy of the slides, just send me an email. We'll make sure that goes out to you.
Okay. Every action learning session has 6 components. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail of these, but I will say that the times that action learning goes is when one of the 6 components is missing. We have to have a problem to work on. The times that I've seen it go really, really badly is when the problem presenter was not willing to admit there was a problem and had already decided the solution, so was just effectively wasting my time. The other times I've seen it go bad is when the problem presenter presents a problem they had years ago, and they're just testing the team to see if they can come up with the right answer. So that is the one that I've seen most often missing. We have to have a team. Teams always consist of 4 to 8 people and as diverse as possible. A team has to be committed to asking questions and the reflective process that comes as a result of those 2 ground rules. We must have strategies and actions at the end of every session. We must be committed to learning on 3 levels. 3 levels being we're going to learn as an individual, we're going to learn as a team, and we're going to take those learnings back to our organization. And then my favorite one, we must have an action learning coach. When teams don't have an action learning coach as part of the action learning, they tend to go back to old habits. I had a team that could only afford for me to come every 3rd visit. So they got a little stuffed bee that they would bring into the sessions when I wasn't there, so that they would have their action learning bee to remind them to follow the rules.
That's great. Hey, B, we have our another question from participants. So I think people, my sense is, again, you've got sort of an interesting combination of clients and colleagues. One of the questions that came up is, why can't teams do this work themselves?
They sort of can. The problem is we've been in such a habit of having to know the solution. We're discouraged from asking questions that we just fall back to old habits too easily. You know, if you think about a 5-year-old and how many questions they have, and then we send them to school and it's sit down and shut up. Know the answers or you fail. Yeah. 12, 16, 20 years, however many years they go to school. Know the answers or you fail. Now I'm saying go back to being that curious 5-year-old. Ask the questions about the things you don't understand about this problem instead of the questions that are going to prove your point. And it's going back to being that really, really curious 5-year-old that it's been a while for most of us, so it's difficult. That answer the question?
It does. It does for me. I assume for the person who asked it as well. So I'll let you continue. Perfect. Thank you, B.
Sure. The benefits that we see come out of every action learning session is breakthrough problem solving, personal and leadership development, teams develop, and organizational change. And the organizational change is the one that fascinates me most because it happens organically. We don't go in doing a change process, but we create an environment where it's safe to question. And as more and more of the organization is exposed to action learning, we see this natural shift to becoming a learning organization. And it's simply a result of making it safe to question everything.
Hey, B, can I ask you a question?
Certainly.
Is that all right?
Uh-huh.
So I wonder, I'm just curious, given these 4 different applications of action learning coaching, was one of them more predominant over, in your experience? And do you think that this will change given that, we're dealing with this coronavirus pandemic? I'm just curious to get your perspective on that.
I think it's fairly balanced.
Gotcha.
It's this triple value that I see because
Yes.
they pay me to come in to help them solve their problems. And oh, by the way, you're going to get all this leadership development and team development without having to pay any extra.
Yeah.
So we can do the team building, we can do the leadership development without tapping budgets. And
That makes
being
sense.
able
Thank
to
you.
do these sessions virtually is made it incredible because we can bring people together from all over the world to do them.
Thank you.
Sure. So everybody thinks the coach just sits there and watches. Well, coach is responsible for a lot of stuff. While the team is working on the problem, the coach sets the tone. If a coach is very tight and tense, the team's going to be that way. Personally, I laugh a lot. And my sessions are always very lighthearted. But this isn't rocket science we're working on. It's not a matter of life and death in most circumstances. We want to get to the solving the problem. We want to figure out how to be better as a team. So let's just move through this. And I think that's part of why it works so effectively is that we don't spend a lot of time on the challenges that arise in a team. We have the conversation, let's get back to work. So the coach is looking for those learning opportunities. As we mentioned earlier, the coach is responsible for making sure we finish on time. So when I'm coaching, I give a lot of time checks, in 15 minutes, in 10 minutes, in 5 minutes, in 2 minutes, and all the things that we've got to get done. And how is what we're doing right now helping us get there?
Gotcha. Hey, B, we've got another question from the participants.
By the
So,
way,
yep. Is there some similarity of this process to the peer coaching process, if you're familiar with that?
I'm not tremendously familiar with it. We do use action learning in a peer coaching kind of technique that we call MPAL, multi-problem action learning, where the teams coach each other. And instead of taking an hour and a half, 2 hours to do a session, each person on the team gets 15 minutes where they help each other out. So I'll have to do a little more research specifically what's meant by peer coaching, but my just guess of what it means, I think it'd be very similar to what we call MPAL.
Yep. That's great. Thank you.
Sure. So coach is looking for ways to improve the team performance and how they're developing their competencies. And what the competencies are is at the beginning of every session, each participant identifies a skill they want to work on getting better at. It's not necessarily something they do poorly, but something they want to take some deliberate time to practice to become better at it. And usually these are leadership competencies.
Gotcha. Hey, B, we have another question. Again, I don't know if you want to answer this now. So one question was, how do you train people to be action learning coaches? Do you want to talk about that now or later?
Maybe we'll throw that in with the end discussion on certification.
Yep, perfect.
So the coach only asks questions, and these are all the reasons that the coach only asks questions. You can read them as easily as I can read them to you.
Gotcha.
One of the important ones out of there is that the coach is not a task facilitator. And if somebody has been a task facilitator for a long time, when they shift to being an action learning coach, they have to retrain their teams. Where a task facilitator will take your notes and capture information on a flip chart for you and everything like that, coach does nothing for the team that the team can possibly do for themselves. The coach will ask questions to get them to think about what they should be doing, but will not do anything that the team can possibly do for itself. And each has a time and place, but within the action learning session, it's very much about getting the team to take ownership and responsibility for their own well-being.
Why is that, B?
So that when you're not there, it continues.
I see. Thank you.
That's how we see the organization change, is that the participants start to understand how their actions impact others. There's a standard set of questions that a coach uses when they're trying to shift behavior, and it's what we summarize as what, so what, now what. And so for me, the what is the behavior I want to see this team doing more of?
I see.
And so that could be, maybe everybody's focused in their own little bubble of line of questions. And so I might say, how are we doing with building on each other's questions? And then follow this with the so what, which is, why is that important? Now, it's not enough to just talk about what's happened, but to understand the impact of it and then make the now what decision. How are we going to make this happen within this team? And this works just as effectively if the team is doing a great job building on each other's questions and you just want to reinforce doing more of it, it's still the same set of questions. How are we doing with building on each other's questions? Great. Well, why is it important that we build on each other's questions? Because it gets us dealing and honing in on what the real problem is. And how can we make it happen even more within this team? A second variation that's used is, I've observed some behavior. Has anyone else noticed that? I save the I observed for things that people cannot argue with me. So I've observed somebody's just left the front room to take a phone call. Did anybody else notice that? Obvious answer. What's the impact on our problem solving if somebody leaves to take a phone call? What do we want our team norm to be around taking phone calls? And so behavior is not just tolerated. Now, in a typical meeting, if somebody got up and took a phone call, everybody would watch them go. A couple minutes later, they'd be back. What did I miss? And we would all stop and catch up the rude person. So in an action learning session, we have the conversation and we make a conscious decision how we're going to treat things. And it's the responsibility of the action learning coach to have the courage to raise everything to awareness and have the discussion.
Hey, B, we've got another question from participants. Is that all right?
Sure.
Yeah. So if action learning is connected to a change management process, which I know sometimes it is, what are some of the team dynamics that must exist or improve for action learning to be successful or effective?
There I have the conversation with the client on what it is they're looking for. I don't think there's an easy cookie cutter answer to that. I think there are many answers, and it depends on the organization.
Gotcha. That's
And
helpful.
so I would have that as an upfront conversation with the organization. What are the skills you want to see? And so instead of having my list of what competencies do you want to work on, we'd have the organization's list of competencies.
Yep. Can I add another one?
Sure.
So I would say another. So I think what B said is a bullseye. The other thing that I would think would be helpful is for the team sponsor to be clear about what is he or she hoping that they're going to accomplish, as specifically as possible around the end state in improving a specific process. And again, given what we're, what's going on in our world today, I would think that would be even more important for the leader to be as clear as they can be about, again, as Stephen Covey said many years ago, start with the end in mind.
And I would take it a step further and say, I'd love the sponsor to be on the team.
Yep.
Doesn't always work, but in my ideal world, they're part of the team.
Excellent. That's great. Thank you,
And
B.
if they're not part of every action learning session, at least have the team come up with how they're going to keep the sponsor informed. The sponsor should never be surprised at the end on what the team has come up with. They should be in the loop so tight from the get-go that they're just up on what's happening. I'm going to go through the next couple a little bit quickly as we're getting a little tight on time, and I do want to hit some of the examples. Positive energy, if you think about the people that you hang around with, when somebody's got a lot of positive energy, you want to be with them. When it's one of those energy vampires, you can't wait for them to get out of the room. So we work very much in this positive space as action learning coaches.
That's great. What did you call
There's
it
a
again?
lot of neuroscience around action learning.
I'm
I think we
sorry.
could do a whole separate
Hey, B?
seminar on the neuroscience of action learning. But
B,
basically, it's about planting positive seeds. The brain doesn't process not. Think about if you tell a kid, don't touch, what's the first thing they're going to do? You go on a diet, you say, don't eat. What's the only thing you can think about eating? I think of it in terms of golf. When you get to know your golf course, you know where all the bad stuff is on the course. So you take your buddy to play there. As you get up to the tee box, you tell them, watch out for the water on the right. We all know right where their ball is going since you told them to focus on that water on the right. I've taken to telling people you want to play this a little left of center. I tell people where to play rather than where not to play. And magically everybody's gotten better. And so action learning is very much about planting the seeds of where we want to go. And let's not even bother to talk about all the other stuff.
Hey, B, can you repeat what you said? You said it was an energy vampire. Is that what you said?
No, we want to avoid the energy vampires.
No, I just want to make sure I captured what the word you used. Yep. All right.
Yeah,
All
yeah,
right. Yep.
yeah. There's a really good book on energy vampires.
Okay.
But we do want to avoid those energy vampires.
Amen.
Because they suck it out of us like you wouldn't believe.
Yeah.
We're seeing actually a whole nother discussion on how action learning builds agile leaders. The shift in how people need to be leading and how action learning helps them get there is self-evident as you go through the process. We already talked about the peer coaching piece of it. And it becomes this great shift in problem solving. And I'm amazed in the 20 years I've been doing this, how many teams are shocked by the concept of getting to the real problem before throwing another Band-Aid on it. So, I think about our cars making this funky noise. Take it into the shop. Tell the guy behind the counter, my car's making this funky noise. He says, let's put new tires on it. What would your response be? Figure out what's wrong with my car before you spend my money. But when we're in business, we do it all the time. I've heard that symptom before. I know what it is. Here's what we should be doing. Let's do, and not even think about what it is. We talked about the learning organization. So now we're going to do the practice as polling questions. And so I'll give you a scenario, and based on your understanding of what we've talked about so far, which of the responses would be that future positive question?
Future positive question. Okay.
Okay, so what should the coach do? There's conflict between two members. Can we bring this up as a polling question? Thank you. There's conflict between two members. What should the coach do? Do you want me to read them or just let people read themselves?
They can read them. They can read them. We'll keep the poll open for another 15 seconds. So again, we're trying to get a perspective of what do you do if you have conflict between two members
As an action learning coach.
as an action learning coach. So I would say, I don't know, people aren't voting. So either why don't you tell us, why don't we close the poll?
Okay.
I'm going
So
to, and why don't you just tell us what do you think we should do?
Right. Okay. So the first answer, that take the two members outside, that tends to be more of a facilitator answer than an action learning coach.
Gotcha.
That's probably not the right answer.
I see.
Ignore it and hope it goes away. We all know how well that works.
Right.
Tell the two members to put their differences aside for the remainder of the session. Yeah, we know how well that's going to work. Or as an action learning coach, raise it to awareness. Ask the team the impact and how they want to handle it.
I see.
So as the coach, you're going to raise it to awareness and ask the team what the impact of that is going to be and what they want to do about it.
I see. That makes sense.
Okay, we ready to try another one?
Sure, let's give it a whirl.
Members are giving open answers to closed questions. And I see this as a very common thing in society all over the world, that we tend to ask closed questions and we answer the question we think we heard and give a very verbose answer to what was actually just a yes or no question.
I see. So the answer here B, is it A, B, C, or D?
For this one, it would be D.
D.
Ask the team how we are doing just answering the questions asked.
I see.
Ask the team why it is important that we just answer what we've been asked. And then how can we hold ourselves accountable to just answering the question?
Gotcha. And B, a question that just came up from the participants in response to this one. Why is it so hard for the coach to just do D? I mean, obviously, I think people know ignoring it is not the right answer, but why is D so hard? And I'll add
I don't think D is hard. I think the hard part is to listen at a different level so that you're aware that the questions and answers aren't actually, the answer is not actually in response to the question that was asked. And by asking this, the coach forces the team members to really, really, really start listening to what the question they were asked was.
Yeah.
You know, we only sort of half listen and then we start answering what we think the question was. My favorite one is when I'm traveling and I say, you know, this is the first time I'm in this area. Can anyone tell me what I should see while I'm here?
Mm.
And the answer to can anyone tell me? It's probably yes. But I usually get a whole list of all the different places I could go. Very bad question on my part. So that's the other thing this forces, is it forces people to start asking for the information they're looking for.
I see.
Because I don't want to know, can anyone tell me? I want to know what are the must-see spots that I should see while I'm here. So it's both about training people to ask good questions, great questions, and to answer what was really asked. If somebody wants more information, they can always ask a follow-up question. Ready to try another?
Let's do it.
A question is asked of the entire team. After one person answers, the team moves on to another question. Do we want to do these as polling questions or just continue the conversation?
I would just continue the conversation. I'm curious about this one. So yeah, I'd be interested, B, to get your perspective on what's the, again, what is the right thing to do for an action learning coach?
I'll give you a hint. The answer is always D.
I see. All right. So um if a question's asked, someone answers it, um can you be an example of what might be a question that you might ask the group to assess the impact? Can you give me an example of a
Okay.
question you
So
might
what
ask?
is everybody's perspective of our decision to do blah, 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 blah?
I see.
Person one answers. So we've gotten one person's perspective. There are
Gotcha.
5 more people in the team that we hear nothing from.
I see.
So there's a lot of valuable information that we're missing.
I see. That's great. I think that's helpful. So again, I assume, B, that the answer is D because you're trying to help the team sort of take, the learning to another level around what's going on. Is that right?
Correct.
Yep. Okay. That's great. Perfect.
Yeah. And they may make a decision that says one answer is fine. We got to keep this moving. But then you have the conversation. Okay, so what's the impact when we move forward when we've asked the question of everybody? Because you might have somebody very vocal in the crowd that needs to be dampened down a little bit so that other voices can be heard.
I see. That's great. I think that's very, very helpful, B. That's great. I would go on to the next slide.
Someone asked a particularly powerful question and there is total silence as everyone contemplates it.
I'm just guessing. D might be the answer here.
Hey!
I'm just demonstrating, B, that I'm a good listener to the guru. So so tell me, B, again, let me ask you 2 questions. One, how many people have you personally trained to be action learning coaches?
I was afraid you were going to ask that.
Give me a ballpark.
I'd guess at least 1,000.
My gosh. So I imagine at least some percentage of these people might be a little bit uncomfortable with the silence. And so is there a suggestion that you have, a really practical suggestion on, if you're the action learning coach, is there as amount of time that you would sit in silence? Give me 3 specific suggestions. If someone asks a powerful question, there's silence. Tell me specifically, what would you do if you were advising me as an action learning coach? Tell me specifically, what would you have me do?
I find most people can't tolerate more than 3 seconds of silence.
Wow.
So if you practice getting to 4 seconds before you get uncomfortable, somebody else will get uncomfortable first.
I see. What else?
3 seconds seems to be the magic number.
Gotcha.
And usually when it's a really powerful question, there's a difference between awkward silence and contemplative silence. And when they're in that deep contemplative place because this question just broke something open for them, the last thing you want to do is derail that train.
I see.
Let them go the depth and find out what was under there.
I see. That's great. Thank you, B. Next slide.
I do suggest making a note of it so that when you're doing a check-in later on, you can ask a question. Were there any really powerful questions? What made it a powerful question? how can we ask even more powerful questions? And if you've written it down, then when the team says, I kind of remember something, and typically the first clue that you've heard a great question is somebody goes, great question.
Yes, that's right. That I think that's definitely true.
Yeah. And so just make a note of it so that you can use it as an example when you're doing a check-in.
That's great.
Because most people will forget by the time you come back around to it. But if you've got it written down and can say, how about when Johnny asked, blah, 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 blah. Oh yeah, well, what made that such a great question? Why is it important that we ask really great questions? All right, somebody asks a question and everybody starts talking at once. Multiple members are trying to answer it at the question at the same time.
Yep. So B, if that happens, tell me again, I'm just guessing, that it's D. What would be the question that you might ask to have the team understand the impact and how to handle it?
This one I might use the I observed. I'm observing many voices at once. Does anybody else notice that?
Yep.
What's the impact of everybody trying to answer the question at the same time? What do we want our norm to be when multiple people have an answer to a single question?
Yep.
I had one team that decided every question is automatically asked of everyone, and we'll go around the table and see if everybody wants to answer it. That lasted all of about 5 minutes when they said, this isn't working. Looks like we have time for one or two more, and then we'll open it to any more questions. The team decides to do some brainstorming.
So again, it's D. So B, it sounds to me like you would not ask the group, or you wouldn't tell the group what are some of the rules of brainstorming. You would ask them what would effective brainstorming look like. Is that correct?
Exactly. It's always make the team figure out how they're going to do this.
Yep. And why? I think I know the answer, but why is that?
So they own it.
Yep. Got it. That's great. Next slide.
Team members are trying to move to a solution before they have agreed on the problem. This usually comes out in the form of, have you tried?
Yes.
And the way that we help teams get to agreement on the problem is we take learning opportunities now and again to have every team member write down what they think the real problem is. We have them do it in writing instead of speaking it, so that everybody has to commit to something.
Gotcha.
Can't just say what he said, what he said, what he said.
Gotcha. Hey, B, we've got about 5 minutes left. Why don't we, if you have some closing things, why don't we do that? And then I'll talk about some next steps, and then we'll try to end on time.
Okay, well, I would just open it to questions.
All right. If anyone has any questions of B, let us know. B, why don't you move to the next slide? Keep going.
They'll get these slides, so they'll have all of these with
keep going. Yep.
And the other place that they can get things like this is there's a blog that I do that's off the WILE website under Action Learning that's called WILE Talk.
Yep.
And part of certification is people have to respond to scenarios like this. That's
great. If people are interested in finding out information about the blog, send me an email. We'll send that out. So why don't we go to the next, keep going. There you go. All right, let's talk about next steps. So I think I think there are three things that people can do if you're interested in either A, learning more about action learning coaching, or B, you'd like to maybe, if you're not certified. So the three ideas are: one, if anyone, and B will do it for the first three people that email me, if either A, you were interested beforehand and now you're more interested about action learning coaching, send me an email, and B has, again, most graciously agreed to do three 30-minute follow-up free coaching sessions for anyone that wants to delve into this in more detail. Second, again, B had a brilliant idea that, again, one of the things that we can do during this time with the coronavirus is we are going to be hosting a public action learning coaching implementation. So we'll have 6 to 8 people be in a team, and B will facilitate that. And if you're interested in that, you just send me an email, we'll send you information. And then the third is, if you're interested in getting certified, and B, I'll let you say 60 minutes on that, and then we'll move on to the next slide.
How about 60 seconds instead of 60 minutes?
That's what I meant. Yeah, there you go.
Right.
I know you could talk 60 minutes about it. Thank you. Sorry about that.
For certification, we have gotten permission from WILE to do a virtual certification class for the rest of this year. So if anybody is interested, get in touch with Ken and we will come up with a plan on how we will make that happen. Close enough to 60
That's
seconds?
great. You did great. You did great. Next slide, please. So we keep going. Next slide. So one of the things that we're going to do is we're going to send you an email as a result of the session. We're going to ask you 2 questions. One, what did you learn from today's session, and how? What did you learn, from the session that's going to help you more effectively implement action learning coaching? And if you can answer those questions, that would be great. It looks as though Carrie has a question. Carrie, given the timing, can you just type it in the chat? Let's see. Yeah, if you can type it in the chat bar, or Kamori, if you can open up Carrie's audio so she can ask her question, that would be great. And B, why don't you go to the next slide? So this is my email is right there. So if if you're interested in getting the B's blog post, which is a must read, B, if you're interested in certification, or C, if you'd like to register for one of these 3 follow-up coaching sessions, just note it there. Kamori, have you put in some information about our coffee session or not yet? I don't see it. Do you have time to do that or not so much? There you go. So 2 things I want to say. Our next scheduled free webinar is April 13th on unconscious bias, and I believe that Skip Pettit is facilitating that. And then one of the things that we have started doing in response to the coronavirus when everyone's home is every Thursday, hopefully, Kamori, I get this right, from 9:30 to 10 a.m., we're doing a very targeted session on a specific topic of interest. So last week, we did a session on working remotely. This week's session is on what are some of the keys to managing in turbulent times. So if you're interested in participating, there's information that is on your screen. And Kamori, if you can make sure that we include this information in a follow-up email, that would be great. It is 2 o'clock, so B, I'm going to end by saying thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. It was fun.
For doing this session. I knew it would be so informative and so helpful. So thank you. Carrie, I would say email me your question and I'll forward it to B and we'll get back to you. And with that, that's the end of today's webinar. B, again, thank you. Do you have a final word of what you want to say to everyone?
Happy coaching.
There you go. That's a good thing to be thinking about these days. So thank you again, B, for a really informative session. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thanks.